This is a steal for the Toronto Maple Leafs as a brand new report has dropped revealing some wild information surrounding Brad Treliving's next move that involves a trade. We're to break down exactly what that player is and discuss what this report means going forward for the team, as well as a few other Leafs updates. But before we get into it all, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, that's 71% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. Your guys' support has been absolutely fantastic. There's a lot to go over today, and obviously the Leafs still are in need of a top six forward. They have made a lot of additions, as we always talk about, but a new name has come up in a new report, and this is a player from the Boston Bruins of all teams. Of course, a team that Leafs fans we're not big fans of. However, I'm a big fan of the player, and that is Pavel Zaka, as a report from James Murphy came out revealing that trade rumors continue to surround the Boston Bruins, with Jonas Korpisalo and Pavel Zaka's name consistently coming up. And there's a new report surrounding the Leafs being interested. We'll dive into all of that. But Darius, we're going to be focusing on Pavel Zaka today. This seems to be a player that, the Bruins have been seemingly shopping all offseason. There's been a lot of rumors about him. But this seems like the perfect time for the Toronto Maple Leafs to step in and actually make a push, because he would fill in the top six. Is he the highest end? Is he, as good as maybe a guy like Troy Terry? Maybe not. But this is huge because it's the first time in a while that a high-level player, depending on, what your view is on him, is actually available in the trade market. And the Bruins do want to trade him. He's coming off of a 47 point. See, at least reports say that the Bruins are interested in moving him, and 47 points last season.
Yeah, and there's other reports about Casey Middlestat potentially being available as well. I don't think that he fits the Leafs. So for the sake of this video, obviously we're just going to focus on Pavel Zaka. I don't think Middlestat would happen, but Pavel Zaka is a very interesting one to me. And like you alluded to, is he a Troy Terry? Is he like an Owen Tippett? All these other guys we've been talking about ad nauseum. No, he's a much different player. He would have a much different use case for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think that he would be able to come in and play second line center, which would be interesting. We were kind of talking about that if the Leafs were to go out and get Nazem Kadri, maybe you move Tavares to the wing. In play, Tavares would still take faceoffs. I've seen the comments. I do believe that he would still, of course, take faceoffs, one of the best faceoff guys in the league. But in play, Zaka obviously has better foot speed. So it's an interesting one. On a bad Boston Bruins team, he's a pretty decent two-way center. Like, he's responsible in his own zone, can play center, all of these things. He was a half a point a game player on a bad Boston Bruins team last year. So there's something to be said about that. I feel like he could probably put up more points with the Toronto Maple Leafs with all the skill on the team. And he makes less than $5 million, just a little bit less than $5 million. So you can free up the space to make that work. Now, do I think that this trade's going to happen? I think it's an interesting opportunity, and we're going to get into the return and a potential return, and I think it could get kind of dicey with what the Leafs have left in terms of prospects and what the Bruins would want in return for a player like this, especially because of his cap hit and that he has term. A lot of teams around the league, including the Leafs, want players with term if they're going to be acquiring them through trade because the cap is rising. If you get a guy who's a UFA at the end of this year, he's going to be making a lot more next season, and it's going to count a lot more towards the cap. So, GMs around the league want guys with term, and that's exactly what Pavel Zaka has. So I think it's an interesting fit for the team. I think that it could work, but again, we'll get into a possible return. I think that the ask might be a bit too steep for the Leafs, but I could see this making a lot of sense.
Yeah, and obviously it's the first time a decent player has been brought up in a report being available. So, and we know Brad Treliving has been extremely active. And last year, 47 points, back-to-back years before that when the Bruins were better, obviously, basically 60 points, 20 goals. And he would fit into the top six. And whoever you move down, that's obviously, it's up to you, or up to the coach, rather. 28 years of age as well, which is interesting. 28 years old is pretty good with a year of term left. It seems like a Craig Berube player. It seems like a Brad Treliving player. Everything in my head seems like it would be perfect fit for the Leafs. However, the return is going to be a big thing here. You can see this for a second as well in his JFresh chart. You mentioned it. He had a bit of a down year, especially advanced analytics-wise. The Bruins were not good last year, but a lot of the advanced analytics, almost like the intangible stuff, favors him a little bit as well. Like, obviously, some of the tangible stuff. Good in the PK, decent goal scorer, good at assists, doesn't take a ton of penalties, all these different things, and 93 percentile teammate grade. I think he could be very solid. And we know this guy's name. You looked at that tweet's from June 29th, the initial tweet. His name's been brought up a ton. Of course, this one here is from yesterday, so obviously some new updates there. But there's some new articles have dropped surrounding who it would actually take for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting because you can see here Maple Leafs add $19 million star from division rival in new trade pitch. Now, we're going to dive into who exactly it entails, and it brings up some interesting points. Now, there was a recent, I believe, an analyst on the radio basically saying that this would make a ton of sense for the Leafs. So there is some links to the Leafs. Now, this trade pitch here, brace yourselves, is Pavel Zaka for Easton Cowan, Nick Robertson, and a 5th-round pick. Now, I do not think that this is going to be the trade that at least the Leafs wouldn't, I don't think would even entertain this one. Like, I think that, to be honest, the Leafs would probably prefer just to throw Easton Cowan out there and hope he puts up 40 or 50 points rather than, trade for Pavel Zaka. However, Pavel Zaka is a known commodity. I'm more interested in, and I think a more likely, at least trade from the Leafs side, if it gets done, would be Nick Robertson and draft capital and maybe a prospect like Dennis Hildeby. Again, I don't know whatever the Bruins would want out of the Leafs prospect. That's obviously up in the air. But this is where it gets dicey. It's a steal if they can grab him for Nick Robertson and some draft capital. If you have to include Easton Cowan, I wouldn't do it. But it goes to show like his value is pretty high because of how good a player he actually is. And it makes things very interesting. But just to reiterate here, a ton of rumors are swirling surrounding the Bruins. Like, everyone is talking about this player in particular getting traded, and the Leafs, especially over the last few hours, have really started to kind of take over the news headlines surrounding him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, well, the Leafs are going to be linked to a lot of players right now because obviously we know that they're going to be making a trade, whether it's to acquire somebody or to free up salary. There's something coming. So obviously they're linked to a lot of players. This is where it gets really interesting to me, the return, because to me, Easton Cowan, there's no way. There's no way for a player like Pavel Zaka. That makes absolutely no sense. And again, you've put so much time and resources and energy into developing Easton Cowan to this point. And now this year, he's finally taken the step to pro hockey, whether it's with the Marlies or the Leafs. Why would you trade him at this point? That makes no sense to me. I can understand why the Bruins would want that player, but you don't make that trade. Now, Nick Robertson's an interesting one, and I don't want to discredit this trade completely because I think there is somewhat of a framework here, but is Pavel Zaka worth it to the point that you would want to give the Boston Bruins Nick Robertson? It's not just about the trade value itself. Do you want to give Nick Robertson to Boston? That's the other thing you have to consider because he's going to score some goals, right? So, and are the Bruins a playoff team next year? Probably not, but do you want to give this player to the Boston Bruins? That's the biggest thing for me. But of course, it's going to be a draft pick. It's probably going to be like Nick Robertson, something like that in return for Pavel Zaka. And it just can't be Easton Cowan for me. You have to see this through. You have to see if he can develop into an everyday NHLer who can make an impact every night, which I think that he will. But again, we have to see how that plays out in training camp. And if he ends up starting with the Marlies, which I don't think is a disaster anyway. But I feel like there is a bit of a framework here, and you have to ask yourself too, is Pavel Zaka the answer for the Toronto Maple Leafs right now, at least, right? Yes, he has term. Can John Tavares still play second line center? Yes, he's been proving everyone, including myself, wrong for quite a while. I think he can still do it for at least the next 2 years, but then you got to start thinking about it. So is this the right move for right now? It depends what the return is. I think it could make a lot of sense for the Leafs. Tavares could still take the faceoffs, and then in play, he would play on the wing, and that might actually work out pretty well for the team. And then you have to think about how that line would work because I imagine he would be playing second line center, so it would be him, Tavares, and Nylander. Would that line work, right? You have to think about that as well. So I think that it could be a sneaky good move for the Leafs, but you have to ask yourself right now, with a return like that, is this the right time to pull the trigger on this player specifically, or should we go out and get a wing? Or do we even make a move? And that's something that everyone's been talking about the last, couple of days at this point. Do you just promote Domi, see how that goes? And then you don't make a move. Obviously, you free up some salary still. You have to trade somebody. They have too many players. But I think things are going to get really interesting as we turn the corner into September.
Yeah, other teams are interested as well. You have the Canucks interested in Pavel Zaka. Hashtag Ducks up, also linked to Pavel Zaka. A lot of different teams there going for him. But again, how would he fit? Would he be enough to actually push this team over the top? If you're trading Easton Cowan, I feel like the Leafs would either obviously they have clear cap space first, but I think Cowan would probably be more of either they try him next year or a trade deadline piece if they really think they can go ahead and win when more players are available, which there will be at the trade deadline. So that'll wrap it up. Let us know down below what your thoughts are on all this. Do you want to see Pavel Zaka on the Leafs? We'll see you guys later.